Good afternoon, ABC team members. Welcome to our final invited address of the 2019 convention program. I am very honored to introduce to you Dr. Matthew Sanders from the University of Queensland in Australia. He has come a long way to be with us today. And Dr. Torpeda and I can think of very few individuals who have so successfully leveraged cognitive behavioral science to improve the lives of families. Dr. Sanders is a global implementation powerhouse. His work is now used in nearly 30 countries by over 75,000 credentialed providers who serve hundreds of thousands of families. The scale of those numbers is just so impressive. His Parenting and Family Support Center is of the utmost relevance to our membership and is themed this year of social impact. And their mission is to create a better world where parents, families, and communities are empowered to create safe, caring, nurturing environments through the lifespan. Someone who thinks big about transforming the world's communities, Dr. Sanders is a clinical scientist, entrepreneur, and visionary all rolled into one, and we are so lucky to have him here today to share his wisdom. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I wonder if we could reflect for a moment on what a world might look like that is both a great place to live and a great place to raise a family. What would such a place look like? How would people interact? What would they do? For me, it's a world where people are aspirational, pro-social and full of hope, where people are well educated, creative and respect their environment. They desire to bring about positive change in their own lives and the lives of others. They value relationships and nurture them every day. They have dreams for their future and have the necessary skills, abilities, and persistence to pursue them. They are confident, resilient, and good decision makers. They have self-control and desire to lead healthy lives, and they value diversity. There is one set of actions that I believe speak to all of these different outcomes that provide a common pathway to enhance human capability across the lifespan, and it's how we raise our children. During this presentation, I am going to argue that parenting really does matter. It matters so much that if we ignore the influence of parenting and family relationships, we will not solve many of the major mental health and social well-being problems that all our countries experience. Good parenting is the clean water of child mental health, well-being and resilience. James Heckman, the famous economist, once said, an economically advantaged child exposed to low-quality parenting is more disadvantaged than an economically disadvantaged child exposed to high-quality parenting. Parenting is so important because its influence is so pervasive across so many different areas of human development and functioning, from the wiring of the brain right through to many of the major social emotional difficulties that we experience with children, including issues relating to their executive function and capacity for self-regulation. However, parenting and the changes in parenting practices is not just about children. In fact, it's an intergenerational issue. The benefits for adults who participate in parenting programs have increasingly been demonstrated to go across multiple areas of their world. They have improved relationships with their children. The kids are better behaved, and it often means there's less friction and conflict with kids. They have improved capacity for self-regulation, particularly of their own emotion if they're learning the skills well. They have improved mental health, increased teamwork in the family if the other parenting partners are on the same page, resulting in less family conflict, and reduce work-family conflict. Good parenting is good for children, for the current crop of parents who are raising children, and remember, parenting is for life. The impact of parenting on the well-being of us all continues to the day we die. There is nothing more distressing than to see a frail older person whose memory is not too good, but who's a grumpy, irritable, escalative person that no one wants to visit, and they'll never see their grandkids or great-grandkids. So let's ask the question, what does parenting, capable parenting, look like at every phase of the life cycle? If we adopt a whole-of-population perspective, we must, I believe, argue that parenting support is central to any policy lens that's about improving mental health and well-being. We need to see an increase in the number of parents who have the necessary knowledge, skills and confidence to parent their children well. We need an increase at a population level in the number of children who are thriving socially, emotionally and academically, and we need a reduction at a population level in the number of children who develop serious social, emotional and behavioural problems, and the number of children who are maltreated or who are at risk of being maltreated by their parents. The principles of positive parenting are pretty universal. A safe, nurturing, engaging environment means that when kids are busy and plenty of age-appropriate things to do, it's an environment where youngsters are engaged. An environment that is a world of positive encouragement and feedback rather than sarcasm, put-downs, negativity. A world where there are consistent boundaries and limits, but where adults have reasonable expectations of their kids and themselves, and they look after themselves as an adult. Well, where would not that apply? In fact, it does apply in every place, in every culture we've looked at to date, where parents have learned positive parenting principles. It makes a difference. Now, if you think about change and we think about the importance of self-regulatory capability of parents as they're acquiring new competencies, in Triple P, really it's about teaching parents the tools of personal change, goal setting, self-evaluating, how you're going relative to where you wish to be, and those goals can be informed by culture. It's about building self-efficacy and personal agency, capacity for future as well as current problem solving, and building self-sufficiency. And so in that way, building self-regulatory capability combined with the notion of what's the minimally sufficient intervention that's required to enable a person in a parenting role to get on with it without anyone's additional interference or support or reliance. In this way, we will reduce the need for ongoing support. Now, self-regulation to me has always been part of my journey as a cognitive behaviour therapist. Right back from 1975, that's me thinking about beginning my PhD. And the first publication in Journal of Applied Behaviour Analysis was with 5 families, and I was totally committed and interested in the notion of teaching skills that would lead to transfer of learning. So if you taught a parent to apply a principle or strategy in one context, to what extent would they apply it with other siblings, different social situations and so on. And I'm still writing about this in our latest book with Oxford on the power of positive parenting. Now, to think about what self-regulation in action looks like from a parent's perspective, let's entertain these ideas. First of all, the parent would have a clear sense of values, behaviours and skills they wish to promote in their children, in themselves, in their community perhaps. They would have realistic expectations of their child, themselves, and of others who look after their children. They would self-monitor their own emotions and behaviour automatically, not in an obsessive checking kind of way. However, when their valued outcomes are threatened, they will bring their parenting behaviour under personal voluntary control. A parent who has a goal not to shout at their children before they get off to school or childcare in the morning, but the kids are doing the go-slows and the parents doing the hurry-ups and they're feeling that they're getting angry and irritable, self-regulation will kick in so that that parent becomes aware that they're about to lose it. Tuning into their actions and knowledge and skills they've learnt to this point, they'll develop a plan in the moment, carry it out, review it. They'll have positive expectations for change. Their reflection on how they've gone will be reflective but not brutal. They won't be into self-criticism and self-blaming. Their reflections will be constructive, and it'll increase self-efficacy and personal agency, and they'll use these self-regulation skills if and when they need to. They will activate them under certain circumstances, and for any of you who are parents in the audience, you know that it's a tough gig raising kids, but you will mostly enjoy the process. Enhancing agency has much broader applicability than to children. We can think of it in terms of parental self-efficacy, I can do this, or familial efficacy, our family can do this and we have the knowledge and skills to do so, or collective efficacy, we as a group of families living in a neighbourhood, living in a community, if we get together, we can make things happen here. Who benefits from this enhanced self-regulatory capability? Well, everyone does. Now, one of the things that I've been concerned about is that we often underestimate the huge opportunities that are created in the delivery of parenting programs to address other issues. The parenting program context is a context for addressing a whole range of other determinants of parental capability and adult functioning and well-being, including the kind of relationship they have with their partner, the kind of teamwork that they have around parenting decisions. It's a context for building self-regulatory capability for the adult who's impulsive and who has a great deal of difficulty controlling emotion. And part of the challenge of optimising the impact of parenting interventions as a psychological intervention tool is to recognise the many different ways and other factors that can be bidirectionally influenced as parents are engaged in a process of learning to parent their children well. The better we do this, the greater the chances we're going to produce better long-term outcomes. However, what do we do when the goal is population level change? There are 7 learnings from large-scale trials of PPP I'd like to share with you relating to what we think is important to do to make things work at scale. The first is that we need a multi-level system, not a one-size-fits-all. Parents vary in the extent to which they aspire to participate in parenting programs and their capacity to do so, and this is not a constant. It evolves across successive phases of that adult's journey in learning to be a parent. A media and communication strategy is essential to draw to the attention of parents that parenting support is available, it's healthy, it's normal, and it's desirable to be involved with. And then 4 more intensive levels of face-to-face intervention, or intervention that involves contact with a specific program, which could be individual, group, or various ways that online programs can be delivered, means that a smaller and smaller section of the population are needing the most intensive and most expensive interventions. The idea that because you have complex family problems, the solution is a complex solution is fraught with problems, because the more complex the solution is, the harder it is for families who are doing it tough to actually interact with those systems. We need a multidisciplinary workforce to engage in this process. Many different disciplines have actually got a mandate to provide support and advice to parents, ranging from teachers to childcare workers, early childhood educators, sports coaches. There's a wide range of people who interact. In PPP, we have trained people from many different disciplines. To date, as of 3 days ago, we had done 8,957 professional training courses that are all competency-based, accreditation-based training processes. There are 98 active contract trainers globally who are training practitioners around the world. We have, to date, done 132,000 training places, and there are 88,000 unique practitioners who've been trained in this set of evidence-based practices across 29 countries. Millions of families are benefiting from PPP every year. If you look at the range of families, countries that are involved, they're many and varied, and the training seems to be just as effective whether it's in a collectivistic culture or an individualistic culture. It seems not to be related to which continent you're in, which political system you're in. In fact, one of the studies with the largest effect sizes for Triple P is in Iran. Triple P is being delivered in 38 states of the US, and there are 20,000 plus trained practitioners here. One question that people ask is, but with all this multidisciplinary mix, I mean, surely the psychologists are going to be much better than all the others. Well, actually, it's not the case. They begin with the same level of feelings of inadequacy in their training, in parent consultation skills, and we found no difference across disciplines, across genders, across countries, in the likelihood that the training process will produce a significant change in practitioners' self-efficacy and agency relating to the adequacy of skills, their confidence, and the skills they're able to deploy. And this is in a sample of 56,000 practitioners that I did just before we came to this conference. We need a process that is truly inclusive of all parents or carers who are involved in the care and supervision of children, and we must think about this as a lifespan challenge, because you can be 70 and become a custodial grandparent. If your kids are not functioning well, the state has intervened and taken over. And that I think the important thing is that there are many people who are in this club sandwich generation where they've got older parents, they've got adult children, and they've got grandchildren, and they're deep into the parenting role. Particularly if you live in a multi-generational household that involves, particularly in Asia, where you may well be raising your children with your partner's own parents in your house. So the question is, would Triple P be culturally appropriate in different Asian cultural contexts? I've just come back from a conference in Singapore where the Singapore government has now made a decision that they're going to deliver Triple P in every primary school across Singapore. They've only got about 100 and something to go, so this is a serious commitment of a government in an Asian cultural context. And basically we have found that the process of delivering Triple P, particularly one focused on a self-regulatory framework, seems to have legs in diverse places. Just remember, a temper tantrum in downtown Tehran, Tokyo, or outside here looks very similar. It's almost universally aversive to people experiencing it. There are a limited range of options that you can deal with it, and the most common scenarios are escalation or cave-in. So parents everywhere are attuned to what works. However, culture does matter. This is work with the New Zealand government, funded by the Ministry of Health, focusing on the development of a culturally adapted version of Triple P for the Indigenous Maori population in the north of New Zealand. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to see what needed to be same or different. So we consulted with elders, practitioners, and parents as consumers. What needed to change or not change? Nothing about the procedures needed to change. A few things about the way in which it was delivered needed to change. They wanted it linked to their principles and values of tikanga, which are it's sort of like the Maori way of raising kids in this iwi, in this tribe. And basically, with the help of elders, we articulated 8 core values that were represented as the side panels of this whare, this meeting house. The front framing of it were the 5 key principles of positive parenting, and the roof line were the 17 core strategies that were part of Triple P. During the delivery of the program, parents, as they were setting goals, getting ready for a plan to implement with their kids, there were moments of pausing and reflection built in to the process to ask themselves whether the plan they are putting together was consistent with their values. With their Maori values that were important in New Zealand. Well, it worked. The one thing I will tell you, though, is that in this scenario, we had been told this was a very high-risk community, lots of unemployment, lots of family violence, and the thought was they're going to need an intensive intervention. You go to the community and ask them what they would like, They did not want that. They wanted a light touch, low intensity discussion group that would completely normalise parenthood preparation in that iwi. And the important thing is that, and when that was done, we were getting intervention effects that were comparable to the most intensive forms of intervention, yet it was 2 brief interventions. Now, when you talk about evidence, you can say, well, how much do you need before anyone pays any attention to anything? This is a plot over 4 decades of the growth of evidence with Triple P. And what you'll notice is that research has been done in 37 countries now. There are 345 evaluation studies. Of those, there are 175 RCTs. 95% of them show positive effects for Triple P, 5% show null effects. 55% of the evaluation studies have had no developer involvement. It has involved 469 research institutions around the world, and about 1,500 researchers have been identified on the papers. There's over 1,000 papers that have been written about Triple P. So 11 different meta-analyses plotting changes in child behaviour and changes in parenting show positive effect sizes for Triple P. They differ because some of them are prevention studies, some of them focus on the treatment aspects of it, some of them are conducted when there are fewer studies available. The most comprehensive one to date involves 16,000 participating parents, and that was showing highly significant medium effect sizes for changes in parenting and changes in child behaviour. But that's including all the prevention studies and all the treatment studies that are in a single meta-analysis. Is it possible to achieve change at a population level? Yes, it is. The CDC funded a population trial in South Carolina, the first place-based randomised experiment showing that when you train practitioners in a community and you upskill a workforce, it can have a significant impact on the level of child maltreatment. This is a proof of concept idea in a randomised trial. There have been subsequently a number of replications of that effect in local counties within the US, and of course there's a recent study published in Prevention Science in Ireland that showed population level effects on changes in mental health outcomes for children. So summarising what these population data are suggesting is that you can achieve a significant shift in the needle in levels of child maltreatment, improved school functioning. This was demonstrated in a 15-year follow-up using independently collected administrative data in Western Australia, showing the kids whose parents invested 10 hours of their time when the kids were 3 and 4 had much better academic outcomes and much lower rates of truancy. And of course, the study in Ireland showing significant impacts on social and emotional well-being and behavioural problems in children. These add up to, in my view, better life course outcomes. When the Washington State Institute of Public Policy does their economic analyses, which are adjusted quite frequently, the return on investment for Triple P was rated in December, when it was implemented as a system, as being for every dollar spent a $10 cost offset. And the effect sizes and the cost offsets are primarily driven by keeping kids out of the out-of-home placement system. Parents hate being judged and hate being evaluated in terms of exposing their competence, and there's a lot of parenting services out there that are associated with stigma. And it's stigma because of the possibility that they're involved, it's activated through involvement in the child protection system. To turn that on its head, we need to normalise it and we need to create pull demand at a consumer level. This means we have to promote, with a communication strategy, the value of participating in parenting support, focus on the needs of children. If it's just focused on the needs of adults, it's much less effective in gaining parents' attention. So when you think about the use of high quality, creative and high impact material relating to a single message, this is healthy, normal, get involved, your kids are going to greatly benefit from it. We need to start thinking about, well, how to do this. We need to be listening to the views of parents, children and end users in ways we haven't done in the past. If we want parents to show up and to participate en masse in a way that is seen as being helpful and useful to them, we need to be engaging with this community, not in terms of what prior epidemiology has said, but it's in terms of the current group of people in this community. Every February for the last 5 years, we've been conducting a pop poll, taking the pulse of the parenting population as a web survey, saying what are the hot button issues for you in this community. We do this jointly with a Sunday newspaper and Channel 7 on TV. We have 3 weeks of information around preparing the community to take the survey, and then we share the results with radio and television to convey the message to the parenting population that the implementers of this program are listening to what local context is important. And we know that the hot button issues change. They're certainly different from how they were when I started this research back in the 70s. We used to be worried about the kids fighting over the phone. Well, they don't have phones now, family phones that you can fight over. But they are concerned about the use of the internet and cyberbullying and so on. In a project funded by the Australian Research Council that is doing a project within a project, statewide we're rolling Triple P out to all families free of charge from birth to age 16. Within that community of the entire state, we're concentrating on 3 areas of major deprivation and disadvantage. And we're comparing it with matched on many variables similar geographical areas in New South Wales that don't have the full Triple P system. One of the things that people are always interested in when it comes to universal approaches is, will it engage the most vulnerable and disadvantaged, living in disadvantaged areas? And the answer is yes. For example, in our rollout, 72% of parents living in the most socially disadvantaged areas have heard about Triple P and are more than twice as likely to participate compared to similar parents living in communities that have maybe a little bit of Triple P but not the system. And the other thing I'd just like to mention is that since the rollout started, in our state alone, 336,000 parents have participated in Triple P, including 54,000 who are accessing the online versions of the program. But will the most vulnerable participate? Well, relative statewide to their, the proportion they occupy in the population, it looks as though we're getting more socially disadvantaged parents participating than would be expected on the basis of their numbers in the community. So we are successfully engaging these families. However, if we're going to have a dynamic, breathing, constantly evolving body of knowledge, we need to be tuned into consumers and end users much better through the entire process of program development, evaluation and quality improvement, because every application is a local one. The assumption that you can just take an evidence-based practice and plant it here without taking context into account is problematic. There's a huge amount of pressure to put everything online, and this is partly a function of just how easy it is to access knowledge on the internet. And it's one thing for us to say as clinical researchers, yes, this is a good idea. Look, the community has already decided it's a good idea and they're doing it anyway. Most families with children have access to the internet and they're using it for parenting advice. Most parenting websites are not evidence-based. I did a Google search before I came in here. 230 million hits for parenting advice. There's never been more information available to the community about raising kids, and it is a preferred delivery modality. There is a recent meta-analysis, which is the second in the last 2 months, that has shown that online delivery of parenting programs seems to produce comparable effect sizes to in-person delivery. The thing that is important is to understand that to deploy online programming decoupled from systems of delivery can be problematic. But our online program, for which there have been 7 RCTs, 6 published, 1 about to be, 300 plus government organisations and NGOs are using P online, and at the moment over 100,000 parents are being supported by those services and agencies. And this is now across 13 countries in 6 different languages, with Mandarin coming shortly. The American Academy of Pediatrics, amongst other professional groups, has been strong in their advocacy for the importance of parenting to partly reduce the adverse effects of poverty, and there have been calls for paediatricians to be upskilled in this space. I've been working with colleagues in the Seattle Children's Hospital, Seattle Children's Research Institute and the Oregon Research Institute to test the delivery of a P online system through community paediatric settings. 32 community clinics have been recruited and randomised to a P online system where the level of intensity of online is based on the severity of the child's behavioural problem between age 3 and 6, depending on a screener. So there's been 119 paediatricians involved, 366 parents of children with conduct problems in that age group. 1 year out from the implementation of this system in these clinics, the clinics that had recruited children have been now followed up at 1 year follow-up, and there are fewer children in the clinics using P online compared to care as usual who are meeting diagnostic criteria for ODD and ADHD. There are lower levels of oppositional behaviour on multiple indices of outcomes and greater improvements in children's positive behaviours, as reported in the last 24 hours on a parent interview. The outcomes don't appear to be moderated by SES, baseline levels of severity, or parental adjustment. And there are encouraging changes in parent behaviour as well. However, here's the rub. 26% of parents who got offered the code didn't even open it. Of those who did, 42% had received the minimum dosage that were considered necessary for that level of online support to be effective. And families who are higher SES and experience less economic hardship were more likely to engage in the program. But remember, this is using intent-to-treat analysis, and you're still getting highly significant intervention effects for that population when the program is delivered through paediatric care. The question is, can we improve completion rates? Well, there are 3 studies that have been conducted to date that looks like if you add phone calls or some contact, it can be brief. In an 8-module program, it can be as brief as 4 phone calls over the period of the parents' participation in the program, often lasting no more than 15 minutes. The use of a closed online network with gamification has been shown to be effective, particularly with socially disadvantaged parents. There was a study conducted in LA with Susan Love driving it, with families who have been primarily involved in the child protection system, that showed good participation and completion rates and outcomes for those extremely socially disadvantaged parents when that was made part of the delivery process. And just recently we've done a study on the role of text messaging, prompting people each week as they're going through a module with text messages that link them to socially normative values. So essentially what this is about is that you're wanting to build this affiliation of the parent that parents like me are experiencing this as being beneficial and what I'm about to do as being beneficial, compared to just a text message that's said to them, this is what's covered in the next session. Okay, the other thing as a cautionary note is that reliance on the internet for parenting advice, I believe, can be extremely problematic. And you do have a phenomenon known as prompt-dependent learning. And what it is that if we think about people who would normally exercise a judgment and a decision about how to deal with something that their child is doing, is now encouraged to check on what it is that other people are saying or what the evidence is saying is a good way of handling this. The last thing you want is parenting by Google. You do not want people to be overly reliant on prompts and cues to do basic everyday functions. And so the important thing is to recognise the conflict of interest that exists between web developers, who often define success by return visits and likes, and what I think is needed, that is that you enter and exit. And maybe you re-enter, but you exit. You're constantly exiting. And that you're being given wings to fly rather than becoming a prompt-dependent learner who does things under instruction. We also have to remember the history of research around self-guided parenting intervention and what works. We've been involved before the internet really was, we had our online offerings of testing Triple P as a self-help book intervention. We've done 4 television series, one in New Zealand, a couple in the, one called Driving Mum and Dad Mad through ITV in the UK, and one funded by NIDA here, which was an experiment focusing on the role of video in promoting learning of parenting skills, and more recently a study focusing on a 6-session podcast series that I did with the ABC. Now, each of these interventions have been shown to produce meaningful change in parents of children with behavioural and emotional problems. And in fact, the podcast series, where it's just listening to a 10-minute piece, was producing effect sizes that was comparable to an 8-session active group skills training program. The other point about engagement is that sometimes we think about public health from a whole of population perspective, but within populations you can also take a multi-level approach. We've had a 3-state rollout of the Stepping Stones version of Triple P, which is for parents of children with a disability. And over 3,000 parents participated in this intervention. This is service-based implementation. Parents were screened about what level of, what type of intervention they would like. Prior to Triple P Stepping Stones being available, a lot of parents, particularly parents of kids with autism, said they wanted home-based support in learning the parenting skills. However, when the intervention was actually available, what did they gravitate towards? Low-intensity interventions that were easy to engage with. Furthermore, we found in this analysis that the Light Touch seminar series around Stepping Stones produced comparable effect sizes at 12 months follow-up to the intensive group program, which is involved a lot of active skills training. When you've got a motivated learner who is ready to engage with acquiring information and knowledge and skills, we should never make an a priori assumption that they do not possess the skills. Often they don't have the combinations that they need to tackle particular things, but when you're motivated and ready to learn, there are lots of ways of acquiring knowledge. One huge emphasis in the US, of course, is around the ACEs, and everyone is aware of the adverse lifetime effects of childhood exposure to these 10 categories of adverse childhood events. The CDC has recently produced some new material in the last few weeks that I've discovered. It's giving a terrific emphasis and focus on the importance of early intervention related to the ACEs. What I would say is that that is great, and that if we were able to eliminate the ACEs and have children being raised with less than 4 ACEs in their social world, there would be many significant long-term health outcomes, not just in the mental health space, but in other areas of health. However, we must remember that the children of yesteryear are now parents of today. And when you think about the ACEs experience of people with a history of ACEs, this is what has been behind us developing a new version of Triple P called Life Skills, a Family Life Skills Triple P. And what it's doing is taking a broad domain of other areas in the lives of parents who are engaging with children to produce this modularised 6-session adjunct that goes on top of 4 sessions of parenting. And we're right at the point of doing the clinical feasibility trial testing in Sydney with a health authority, and it is absolutely using this co-design notion of finding the fit for purpose for that intervention within a delivery system. We don't know whether it's going to work. We're optimistic. We think it's got a very good chance of making a significant difference for these very pointy-end families. However, when you're talking about a population strategy around parenting, remember the level of risk can exist within the adult who's a parent, but also with children. And so children who, for example, have significant problems such as being peer victimised and bullied, that was behind why we developed an 8-session program called Resilience Triple P, which is essentially 4 sessions of teaching the parents the skills that they needed to coach the kids and the social emotional capabilities of friendship making and dealing with peer provocation. We found highly significant reductions in bullying through multiple informant assessment, a massive increase in liking for going to school. And I remember one of the quotes that one of the kids said about participating in Resilience Triple P. He said, "This program works so fast, I've already got my first ex-girlfriend." And so when you start to think about the children's experience, their journey, it's important to recognise that not only internalising problems with these kids being at increased risk for depression and so on can be influenced by parenting, but so can anxiety. And working with colleague Vanessa Cobham, we've just about to release the new Fearless Triple P, which is a 6-session, parent-only intervention for children with diagnosed anxiety disorders. The pilot of that work was published in Behaviour Research and Therapy. However, are we there yet? No, we are not, because if you start to think about the parental community and different contexts and opportunities for engaging with parents, just remember there are many others in children's social world who can have a big influence on their children. Kids' sports coaches, their music teachers, their classroom teachers, the environment of learning dance, learning to play a musical instrument, and of course, learning to look after a family pet. Now, if you think about pet care for just a moment, remember, families that adopt pets from shelters are more likely to relinquish them and have them euthanized if there's a lot of family violence going on. And could the environment of adoption of a pet be an environment for not only teaching, nurturing, caring skills through parents to children, but through that process, would it influence sibling relationships? So let's not think narrowly about opportunity. When you think about sport, for example, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry worldwide. In Australia, it's estimated to be between $10 and $30 billion annually. The big concern of many sporting organisations is that children are leaving in their droves after age 9. It's starting to show a decreasing participation rate that continues right throughout adulthood. And so we've been working with the National Rugby League in Australia to develop a new program focused upon children's transition into playing rugby league as a sport. And what it is that they're interested in is looking at enhancing parents' capabilities to support their children's enjoyment and participation in sport. So rugby league is pretty popular in Australia. It's a dominant winter code in at least New South Wales and Queensland. Each year there's about 36,900 players across Australia playing rugby league for the first time, and most of those are children. So there's an opportunity. Parents influence hugely the success of junior sport, and rules that are established relating to codes of conduct such as this one, these are kids, this is a game, the coaches are volunteers, the referees are human, this is not the NRL, well you could say NFL or anything else you like. in terms of the sport. And we know that when this sort of stuff happens, it is horrible. Okay, so some of you would have seen that on the news. So kids stopping playing sport, poor parenting, poor coaching. And if you think about the adverse consequence of that for a sports spectator base in the future, it's got big economic consequences for codes as well. So we've been looking and did a statewide survey in Queensland and New South Wales. We got about 2,000 parents to participate. We were looking at factors that would predict this kind of behaviour. And to cut to the chase, basically the parents who are most likely to lose control while they're watching their kids' sport had children with higher levels of behavioural emotional problems, surprise, surprise, lower control over their own personal emotions, lower tolerance for their own emotional distress, lower overall emotional well-being, and greater levels of emotional investment in rugby league and greater competitiveness. So winning becomes very important. Why do kids play games? To make friends and to enjoy it. It's kind of, whether you win or not is something that adults, we impose that winning culture on kids, but it's not the reason they join, and it's certainly not the reason they stay. So Active Triple P is the new program in development where we've been asked to develop a prototype for a universal online parent induction program. Every parent registering their child to play this sport will be asked to participate in this 2-session online program. There will be a coach's orientation program and text messaging to prompt during the course of the season. The issue here is, can this work, and will the activation of cultural change and the implication of that for the bystander encouragement of really negative parenting be sufficient to reduce the level of toxic parent behaviour? So these are just the areas of content that are covered in that program. I won't go through it in detail, but it's going to be highly video enriched. You're going to be able to do it on your phone, you're going to be able to do it on a tablet or a computer, and it's going to be interesting and kind of entertaining. We've just finished all the filming and getting it ready to go onto an online platform. This will be a prototype for other sports. And so if we can get it working in rugby league, then we can look at its applicability in other delivery contexts. And already folk from other countries have approached us about its relevance for for football and or soccer, as you call it here, and other sports. The seventh learning, really, about making things work at scale is sustained high-quality implementation. And there have been presentations at this conference, and many others I've heard over the last few years, that have said it's not just the quality of training that you provide, it's the organisational support subsequently that really determines whether people continue to deploy evidence-based practices. So if you can contrast an organisation that has many enablers working in its favour, the leadership is supportive, funding is available, supervision is provided, the materials are accessible, it's built into the workflow that a person does as a core part of their job, we're more likely to get sustained use of a program in that environment at lower cost per family and higher return on investment than if you have this scenario. A person rocks up to training and they didn't even know what the training was about, but I was told to be here today. No preparation, no engagement of the workforce in a workforce development process, and an assumption that is inappropriate, and that is that your job is to do what I tell you to do. And in so doing, it's guaranteeing that we're undermining professionals' capacity to be generative, to look at how to really take an evidence-based practice that requires not only a manual, but a brain. And that brain enables, thank you Sherry Shapiro for sharing that thought, but I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind that practitioners have enormous capacity to appropriately tailor exemplars, appropriately tailor their degree of practice of doing something, customising homework to take into account local context, other broader family issues. The other thing that we don't pay any attention to, in my view, is selecting the right combination of ingredients to deliver. These are hypothetical practitioners who, the first one in the blue is delivering 6 PPP groups a year to 10 families a time. Assuming stability of employment over 5 years, they'll have reached 300 families. A same individual practitioner who, instead of doing 6 groups, does 6 seminars, 2 groups, 5 discussion groups, which are kind of one-off 2-hour gigs, and supports 40 families with online, could reach 1,300 families. 4 times as many families with fewer contact hours by having a different combination of intensities of delivery. Okay, now let's look at where we're heading. Harnessing the power of the family and its influence to promote global well-being. The UN's Sustainable Development Goals are really important. Every country has to report against them. It's about creating an equitable world without violence and discrimination where everyone can achieve their potential. I would argue, and I've written about this, that parenting and family functioning is related to every one of these Sustainable Development Goals. Let me illustrate. Goal 14, conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas and marine resources for sustainable development. What we need to be thinking about is how do you activate a protective response in parents towards their children, the ecosystem and the future that those kids, future economic opportunities. This can involve recognition that current practices can be damaging children's future livelihoods, and by having families refrain from practices that damage valuable marine resources and develop new ways of generating sustainable income. This work through the Seacrest project funded by GEF and the World Bank and UQ's Global Change Institute was located in Indonesia and Philippines. Through our PPP Innovation Fund, we had graduate students working on these projects to do with producing a sustainable future. If you think about the idea, it's not obvious to most people that in an environment where a reef is being destroyed, that families and parenting are going to be part of the solution. However, fishermen who are bomb fishing the reef and using cyanide to catch fish live in families. And so how is it that we could mobilise the family system to be more committed to environmentally friendly practices that locally are destroying their marine environment? And remember, these coral reefs are being degraded by overfishing, fishing using cyanide and dynamite, pollution from sewage and agriculture, and massive outbreaks of predatory starfish and other invasive species, and sedimentation from poor land use practices. So the issue is, how can we bring a community of individuals who live in family groups, who live in villages, together to become an ecologically sustainable family environment? as a proof of concept, we were simply interested in an environment where these are Indonesian families living in Selayar. They speak a dialect. There's one of 700 languages in Indonesia. Many of the families are poorly educated with just primary school education, living on $2 a day. So it's an impoverished environment. There's not stable electricity. We were interested in developing a local, low-cost solution, and basically they cleaned up the village. They cleaned up the plastic that was in their homes. They learned to dispose of them differently so it didn't go into the river system, onto the reef, and the consequences into the food chain. It was promising. It was replicated then in an RCT in the Philippines, in another island group. But in the village in Indonesia, it was nominated as the cleanest, healthiest village in Indonesia. And it happened through the empowerment of families, particularly women, taking the lead in educating themselves, their partners, and their children to behave differently towards the environment. But wait a minute, are we really there? Am I saying that we can transform the lives of children, parents, and whole communities through parenting? Just parenting? No, I'm not saying that. However, parenting can make a huge contribution to many diverse outcomes if we adopt an evidence-based multi-level system of parenting support where programs delivered with both fidelity and flexibility, with attunement to local context, and that reflective practice and evaluation of outcomes is simply routine. It's embedded into the delivery so that quality improvement, research and innovation is ongoing. The biggest problem I see with the adoption of evidence-based practices is their lack of capacity to continue to evolve in the light of new knowledge. And so we have to have systems of ongoing R&D supporting any innovation that's out there. Thank you very much. Okay, there's a couple of minutes. Anyone want to ask a quick question before we all disappear? Hi.
How do you think about having the participants transfer that knowledge to their partners, wherever their partners may be?
Well, the research shows on parenting that if fathers don't attend a parenting group when there are two parents, the mothers generally do transfer that information, and that there is not compelling evidence that you get better outcomes for children if both parents attend. In other words, children can attend, and if one parent who spends a lot of time with those children learns the skills and implements them, the kids are going to benefit. Therefore, parents and single parents and so on are likely to derive benefit from that. Where there is a problem is if there is severe relationship conflict and there is really very strong marital dissatisfaction and violence. But that's different from conflict over parenting. But the point I would make is that we should be never letting fathers off the hook in terms of their critical role in children's development, and that's why we believe delivery of programs like Triple P in sporting environments and also as a workplace intervention can be very, very useful.
Congratulations on an excellent talk and an amazing career to date, and your three identical twins are also doing good work.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.